Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Western Spirit. Today, we have a very special guest all the way from India, Abhijit Iyer-Mitra, and you're going to fix me if I pronounce it wrong. Abhijit is and I want to get your title 100% right. You are a senior fellow at the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, and you're someone who really knows the Indian position and why India takes certain positions on the world stage. And I think that whoever follows you knows how much of knowledgeable you are on these issues. It's a big pleasure and honor to have you with us today, Abhijit.
Well, it's a pleasure being on the podcast, Ariel. Thank you for having me on. Just to clarify for your viewers, I'm a bit of a gadfly. The foreign ministry here hates me. So just letting your viewers be aware that you're getting a fairly anti-establishmentish point of view. Yeah.
All the better. Here too, they don't really like me, so we're good. So, Abhijit, let's. I'm talking to you from Israel. We've been at war for the past year and plus almost 2 years already. Um, and the Indian response for after October 7th. Maybe you can just walk us through what India's response has been. At least I in Israel have not heard really, maybe except in the first few days, a sort of, feel, mutually, we feel your pain, whatever, condolences. But other than that, I haven't really heard anything about what is India's official position on the war. Either I haven't really heard them being critical of Israel, but also not supportive. How are we to see India's position here?
So the first thing is, if you notice the criticisms that came out, which were in the beginning, uh, it is considered below the dignity of any government official to mention a terrorist organization, which is why no Prime Minister of India will ever mention even our terrorist organization, say Hizbul Mujahideen or Lashkar-e-Toiba or something like that, by name, uh, because it's seen as giving them validation.
Mm.
And these people live for, legitimacy, publicity, validation, and things like that. And that's the first thing. And that shouldn't be interpreted as a lack of support. Quite the contrary. It's sort of, it's halfway to acknowledging they're terrorists, number one. Number two, it was the first time India broke the sort of equivalence. There were usually statements saying, oh, what happened was very bad. We now call for peace and temperance. There was no call for peace whatsoever from India this time, right? The third thing, which the foreign minister uh, doubled down on in parliament, very unusually, was the supply of arms to Israel. Now, normally it's Israel that supplies us with arms, but
Yeah.
as it turned out, you required a lot of dumb munitions this time, which we have a lot of excess capacity for, and we were very happy to supply you. And normally, what would have happened is, had this been caught out and challenged in parliament, the government would have gone completely underground, tried to cover it up and say, oh, maybe it was an oversight or whatever. This time, there was absolutely none. So, this was just 3 months back when the foreign minister was asked this question. He said, yes, they supply us with arms. They're our allies. They've been very unequivocal in supporting us. We're completely unequivocal in supporting them. He was then asked a supplementary, did you impose any kinds of restrictions? And he replied, well, Israel is the one country that sells us arms without any restrictions on what we use those weapons for. And so, sorry, our relationship is based on reciprocity. They don't put conditions on us, we don't put conditions on them. Now, this is, as international support goes, this is the most India will do for any country,
Mm.
right? We generally believe in keeping our nose out of other people's business. And this is as much of in your face, short of picking up the Israeli flag and singing Hatikva in the Indian Parliament. It's the closest to support your any country's ever gotten from India on this issue, unless there's a great natural tragedy like an earthquake or something, which is that's a
Yeah.
different matter. Um, it's also a very clear. It's an a counter-terrorism policy, because we believe that with terrorism there can be no equivalence, that every country has a right to wipe out terrorists completely. which is why every time India has never called for a ceasefire, it says humanitarian pauses as and when required.
Mm.
It has at no point of time called this a genocide. It has no point of time called it, uh, uh, you know, uh, uh, it needs to stop. It has never used the term disproportionate, the most abused term, in my opinion, after. Uh, uh, genocide, the value of that word has kind of eroded completely.
Yes.
Disproportionate is a very specific legal term, and it's been bandied around in such a sort of cavalier, useless way to dilute its use. We need to be very careful. Proportionate is not. It's not like Ariel punched me in my face, and therefore proportionate is I punch you back. Proportionate is to your war aims. Ariel punched me. I have decided I am going to kill Ariel, and therefore, proportionate is me buying a business class ticket to Tel Aviv, coming there, organizing my stay at the Hilton, getting a cab to your place, paying a private detective to find out where you are, then coming with, I don't know, an RPG or something like that and blowing you up. Right? This is proportionate uh, to the goals, to the war goals that I've set.
Hmm.
So these are things that India has actually pleasantly, in my book, gone over and above the call of duty in my 47 years on earth.
Wait, so, but I want to just maybe explain to us why. So, maybe even five, six, seven, definitely decades ago, if any of this would be happening, we would hear what you said. Like, we call for everybody to have restraint. Let's stop the violence now, even if it's obvious who the perpetrators were, who started it, who is the terrorist, who is not. We used to hear 10, 15 years ago what you explained, and now we don't. So maybe just give us a little bit about why is India changing so it's tuned to such a large degree.
Okay, so what you would have heard before this is actually something that the then leader of the opposition, Sonia Gandhi, actually uh, wrote about and said several times. Her daughter and her son have said the same thing over and over again, which is, one pro forma paragraph condemning what happened on the 7th of October, and the next 10 paragraphs blaming Israel and saying why Israel is responsible for everything, including what
Yes.
happened on the 7th of October, right? Now, there are many sources to this. The first is, this sort of misguided anti-colonialism, if you want to call it that, assuming, of course, Israel is a colonial power. I think, of course, Israel is the greatest decolonization story in the Middle East. So, it's first of all, there's that sort of confusion about what is colonial and what is not. But in the Indian context, I guess, very crudely, white is colonial, not white is anti-colonial. And we didn't care how bad the anti-colonialists were, which is why, in Zimbabwe, for example, we had supported Mugabe and the ZANU PF, who, using North Korean mercenaries, were going around essentially committing genocide, killing off uh, an entire segment of the population, very targeted against specific ethnicities and things like that, or people like Samora Machel in Mozambique, who were again very, very nasty characters, very, very
Hmm.
dubious characters. Kim Jong, the Kim family in North Korea, etc. Why? Because they fought against the Japanese, allegedly, but so on and so forth. Now, this anti-colonial uh, thing is one element that informs policy. The second has been the alleged Muslim vote bank. Now, remember, there are two Muslim vote banks, if you want to call it that, in India. About 90% of India's Muslims are Sunni, 10% are Shia. That 90% generally tend to vote for parties like the Congress. They are not completely beholden to the Congress, but they tend to vote for the Congress. And that is an important vote bank that the Congress needs to nourish, especially now, given its fortunes, its electoral fortunes, and its financial fortunes are in severe decline.
Hmm.
It's one of those things where you preserve what little you have, and they've doubled down on the rhetoric in a way they probably wouldn't have used 15 years back, right? The third aspect of all of this, which tends to evade any kind of scrutiny, is the fact that Sonia Gandhi, uh, the former leader of the opposition, the mother of the current leader of the opposition, her father was an Italian fascist who actually fought in Hitler's army. He took part in the German invasion of Russia, of the USSR, in Operation Barbarossa. He was a member of Army Group South, which is, the one that went into Ukraine and carried out the Babi Yar massacre and a lot of those massacres. And people don't realize that, most of the killing was actually done by the army, and most of the Holocaust, at least half the Holocaust, had been finished off in those first 6 to 9 months
Yes.
of Operation Barbarossa by the army, by bullets and bayonets and things like that, before the gas chambers came in later on, as a sort of mopping up operation, really. So it's something nobody has ever asked her about, nobody challenges her about. Uh, uh, no so-called independent interviewer dares bring up that question with her. She has never acknowledged that in her past. In fact, her son, the current leader of the opposition, very fondly talks about going back to Italy to meet his sweet grandma. Now, if you keep bringing up your parents and grandparents, I think it is a journalistic duty to raise scrutiny about their conduct and their past, which never gets done out here. Now, I don't know what role that plays, but certainly for somebody who doesn't seem to acknowledge that particular past, it may be a very, very significant role in how much more vitriolic this particular family's stance towards Israel and the Congress party stance towards Israel has become under this family.
Abhijit, what that explains why the opposition and the former ruling parties didn't support. But what is the reason why the current ruling party does support Israel? So, why would what is it? Because we know that India, we're a small country here. You're giant. I think the fourth largest economy right now in the world, the most people in the world. You're surrounded by countries that don't particularly like us.
Hmm.
What would be the reason for the current government to support Israel in the way that you explained?
All right. So, several things. First is counterterrorism. We believe terrorism is indivisible. This one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter is not a line that you will find that gets any traction in India whatsoever. And, it used to be the sheer irony of India railing against Pakistani terrorism and then welcoming Yasser Arafat like some long lost hero and hugging him and kissing him. And there was this very famous speech he gave at Rajiv Gandhi's funeral, uh, who himself was a victim of terrorism. He was blown up by a suicide bomber, a Sri Lankan suicide bomber. He made a really bizarre speech. He said, "He was my brother. He was the son of my sister." And we're like, dude, if he's your brother, how can he be the son of your sister? This doesn't really add up. But, we kind of dismissed it as cultural relativism and went along with it. But that is something which finds zero resonance in the BJP, number one. So the counterterrorism aspect is one of those things where the BJP has actually been very good, zero tolerance for any kind of insurgency, including in our own neighborhood. Sometimes things that could even be useful for us, we tend to crack down on very, very harshly. There is literally zero tolerance for it. And I would say, in that sense, we are much more enlightened than the Americans who think Al Jolani is now one of their guys. Uh, right, we've tried these stunts. We tried fomenting internal terrorism in Punjab. It came and blew up the prime minister who started it, Indira Gandhi. We tried fomenting it in Sri Lanka, and it came and killed her son Rajiv Gandhi. And since then we've been very clear: no terrorism nowhere, whether in our interests or against our interests. Terrorism is just bad, period. So we've got that sort of very unblinkered view of terrorism. This is number one. Number two has been the ideological proximity to Israel, because Israel is a civilizational state. India is now moving towards becoming a civilizational state, because, what is a nation state? It's a bunch of people who concoct their own identity in that sense. It's, you can identify as anything you want. If you want to become the Republic of Olga and Evgeny, you can become the Republic of Olga and Evgeny, I guess. So in this case, the sense of what is India was in fraying, because you can't define yourself in opposition to British colonialism 70 years after said British colonialism ended.
Hmm.
And so it's moving towards a civilizational state, which is not the same as a religious theocracy. We need to separate a religious theocracy from a civilizational state. That's a complex discussion we can get into later on if you want. But, and you see Israel, which is able to be, sure, it has religious types, but it also has a very secular constitution. It has lots of secular people moving around, progressive, at peace with itself, uh, which is kind of what we want. That is the path we want to go to ultimately. At least that's the BJP's path. So there's that alignment as well. The third alignment that's come about is that the Middle East no longer posits this as a zero sum game. It's either us or it's Israel, you choose. So ever since MBS came, and MBS was really mentored by MBZ, before MBS and MBZ fell out over how the war in Yemen should be conducted.
Hmm.
But it's still no longer a zero sum game. So it's become very easy for India to carry out its foreign policy with regards to Israel. Uh, and it's really these three strands: the removal of the opposition, the sort of ideological affinity, and of course, there's the fourth thing as well, that the BJP doesn't depend on Muslim votes, you see. Not that it's ever been demonstrated that Muslims vote based on your position on Israel. Israel was very conveniently used as a scapegoat in India, but there
Hmm.
has not been any proof so far that has correlated either Shia or Sunni voting patterns with your position for or against Israel.
And also one more question that just on the at least the way we look at Prime Minister Modi is that he's more of a religious Hindu than the former prime ministers in the past. Does the fact that he's more religious or more connected to his traditions and the people around him, does that make him more susceptible? Sort of, we have a common enemy, Jews and Hindus, the Muslims, the radical Muslims at least, and that makes him more open to liking Israel or being more friendly towards Israel.
So, this thing that, oh, we need to tag along with the Jews and kill all Muslims, this comes from an extreme fringe,
Uh-huh.
which is, one of those uh, uneducated roadside opinions which you'll get in maybe 1% of BJP supporters. They exist. There's no profit in denying they don't exist. It's just that they're a fringe, right? Uh, the thing really is, Israel doesn't evoke any emotions in India natively, in that we've never had anti Semitism. Right. If you look at the Jews who came here historically, there was no restrictions on finance, usury, or
Hmm.
whatever you want to call it. There was no restrictions on what day you chose to work, what day you didn't choose to work. So Jews who came here were like, dude, like, where's the niche that I can find and do my own unique thing? They're like, buddy, sorry, no special treatment for you, no niches for you, no ghettos for you either, but no niches for you either, right? So there's never been anti-Semitism per se, and the only stories most Indians know of Israel are how this tiny state goes about whacking all its neighbors, which are much much bigger. So
Mm.
it's sort of that zero exposure to the virus of anti Semitism, plus this sort of David kind of figure that goes around bashing people much bigger. So it's like, yeah, man, he's the mean guy I want on my side kind of attitude generally. So
Okay.
yeah, so it's one of those things where that inhabits the BJP mindset and Modi's mindset more than this sort of Islamophobia or let's all gang up against Muslims, especially now when Muslims aren't really ganged up against us
Right.
anymore. That era is mostly over. Are there terrorists? Sure, there are. Are there one or two countries here or there, malignant actors here and there? Sure, there are. But that era of isolation is over. And Modi is about as secular as any previous prime ministers. The difference used to be, now, the problem with secularism is it's one catch-all term in English, whereas American secularism is so different from French laïcité, which is very different from Indian dharma nirpeksh. Now, American secularism was formed by religious loonies coming over from Britain, who were too lunatic even by British medieval standards, wanting to be lunatics and for lunacy to be normalized. So it's an acceptance of all forms of religious loonyism in that sense. The French laïcité is very anti clerical, being born of the revolution, and it's the exclusion of all religion from public life. So it is uh, uh, almost militantly, in that sense, looking to remove any vestige of religion in anything public. India is somewhere closer to the American model, which is dharma means religious path, nirpeksh means not taking, not picking favorites, religious non-favoritism. So everybody gets to be loonies or not loonies, and everybody gets to take part in public life. The problem is people used to show obscene favoritism based on who votes how.
Mm.
That's more or less ended now, right? The gravy train that used to go around because of that favoritism has ended. So
And
it's
that's a good
kind of,
thing.
yeah, it's kind of like Dodge going after everybody's gravy train in America, kind of, not exactly. But it's a very good thing it's ended. There are a lot of people whose shop used to run on those handouts, which no longer run. And so everybody's very, very pissed off about it. So that's
The old guard, you mean the people who used to live off the backs of the taxpayers?
basically,
Yeah.
basically.
And so it wasn't ideological, was more like corrupt.
It was corrupt because what would happen is, see, Indian Muslim polity never modernized after the 1700s.
Hmm.
Once the Turkic invasion started in 1192, uh, India was overwhelmingly ruled by different Muslim dynasties, Turkic Muslim dynasties, till around the 1750s, where the Maratha Empire almost reconquers the whole of the subcontinent. Uh, it's a Hindu dynasty. And what ends up happening is uh, a lot of the relict Muslim ruler families out here, they sat in this thing, we ruled this country once, we ruled this country once. Where is your modernized polity to deal with new things? When the British take over, the Hindus modernize very rapidly. We go towards modern education systems, a modern polity, a modern representation system, uh, uh, find new ways of negotiating the political landscape and things like that. The Muslim polity has never modernized.
Hmm.
So their language of political negotiation is street violence.
Uh-huh.
So that's what happens with the Pakistan Muslim League and the call for partition during independence. And it becomes the tool of Muslim political negotiation even post partition in India. And the problem there is it remains very feudal. There are these few 100,000 people on the top who get all the favors, and their feudal serfs, or whatever you want to call them, bonded labor serfs, what have you, have to come out and vote the way they say. They have to go riot when they're told to, go burn buses or schools when they're told to. Uh, and in return, you may get your daughter's admission in a school. You may get your son admitted to the oncology ward if he's got cancer, etc., etc. But it's very much a feudal lord, the liege and the serf kind of a relationship.
Hmm. Right.
The modern state hasn't permeated Sunni society. Shias, on the other hand, modernized very, very rapidly. Now, remember, we have several different sects of Shias out here. The Daudi Boras, the Ismailis. The Ismailis used to be the Hashashum, the assassins, the old man of the mountain at Alamut who Genghis Khan, or I think Hulagu Khan, destroyed completely. And these guys are extremely modern. They have no, uh, they'll happily drink wine, eat pork.
Mm.
Um, uh, 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 Not the Dowdies. The Dowdies are they're very nice, sweet people. They focus entirely on trade and business, and they're actually the biggest Modi and BJP cheerleaders around. Anytime you see Muslims cheering for Modi, they'll be wearing these long white robes and white turbans, and they're the Dowdi Bohras. Very rich community, probably India's richest community. The second richest community are probably the Ismailis, which is the Aga Khanis who just died. And supremely rich. And the Aga Khan believes you can do whatever. You don't have, not eating pork, not drinking wine doesn't make you a good Muslim. It is to have a good heart that makes you a good Muslim, help people, be kind.
Hmm.
And so they're completely focused on making money and trade, and they love Modi, right?
But they're only 10% of the population, the Shiites. The
And
90% that you were saying, they are still stuck a little bit, maybe not even a little bit. They're still stuck where we explained. And
exactly,
yeah, so let me just ask you one more thing about international relations in India. So, our big enemy here, who's financing Hamas, Hezbollah, we just had yesterday Hassan Nasrallah's funeral here. It was very interesting.
we
Um,
loved it. You know, it was played on loop out here with those two F-35s and the two
yeah,
F-15s flying
they gave
past.
them a little bit of music on top of the whole funeral.
That's it.
But the fact is that thousands upon thousands of people came, which is pretty depressing, but whatever.
Mm.
But who the people who are financing that, and in the Iraqi militias in Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen, and and Hamas, obviously, and the in Sinai, people don't know we have ISIS still in Sinai, and all these other places all over the place are all basically financed by Iran and a little bit of Qatar too. But Iran, India has a pretty good relationship with Iran, and it's sort of playing a game where they are they I guess, like you said, very much against the attacks, for example, on October 7th, very much against, very much pro-Israel in its fight against terror, even though, like you said, they won't want to say the names, but they still understand our fight. And on the other hand, so they're against Iranian proxies, Iranian aggression, the way the actual deeds, but they'll still have a very warm relation with Iran. Are
Mm.
we to understand that only in terms of economic interests, or is there something else going on?
No, it's geopolitical. Now, just to clarify, we do not have warm relations with Iran.
Hmm.
It's just that we don't have cold relations with Iran. And I'll tell you why. The Iranians, every time the world sanctions them, they come to us and say, "Oh, my dear friends, Farsi used to be your language too. For 200 years, you produced more Farsi poetry and literature than Iran did. Uh, 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 we love you so much." And the moment the world removes sanctions on them, they're like, "Oh my God, you dirty brown people, get away from here. You smelly spice eaters and you stink of spices all the time. How dare you, violate our space," kind of thing. And we're used to being treated by the Iranians like this, right? So when people say there was people to people contact between India and Iran, the last people to people contact was this Iranian emperor called Nadir Shah, who came to my city, Delhi, 300 years back and slaughtered about 100,000 people. Yes, so not exactly the kind of people to people contact you want to advertise at any rate. But anyway, what ends up happening is Iran is important for us because we need to supply Afghanistan. The Taliban there have turned decisively against Pakistan, which is very, very important for us. We need to keep supplying them. When the Americans were there, we were using Iran as much as possible, as much as the Iranians would let us, to supply Afghanistan. The second reason was
Wait, the
because
supply of what? Just explain to us again.
supply arms, supply
Ah,
grains,
arms.
supply medical equipment,
Hmm.
medicines, everything that we required. We built several dams in Afghanistan, we built several schools in Afghanistan, and all of that supply had to be done via Iran, right?
Okay.
It's been an extremely important route for us to supply Afghanistan. And today, of course, the Taliban have become our friends. We're still very reluctant dealing with them, but as long as they're willing to punch Pakistan real good, we're quite happy with that. And Jolani has become this great secular leader, moderate opposition. It is my story that the Taliban are actually highly progressive, secularist feminists in the Afghan cultural context. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. If Jake Sullivan gets to have his story, I get to have my story, and I will not tolerate uh, uh, any criticism of my story. So that's been important. But even more important, people don't realize it's historically been important. When the Shia Sunni split happened following Khomeini's takeover in 79, uh, 10 years later, the Afghan jihad ended when the USSR withdrew.
Yes.
And all the troops, all these subconventional forces that had been used against the Soviet Union were turned on Kashmir. And at that point of time, the Shia Sunni split was extremely important for us because it meant we could cut off any land supply bridge to Pakistan. In those days, the Saudis and the Emiratis were not terribly pro India. Uh, Pakistan used to be the success story, India was the failure in those days.
Mm.
And so, Iran being on the other side, preventing a land bridge and preventing more mischief was very, very important for us. So they sort of saved our skin in Kashmir several times for over a decade. We've found them very useful to supply Afghanistan and circumvent Pakistan. So it's a very important geopolitical gambit for us, in spite of the fact that they don't like us very much and we have to keep dealing with the hot and cold. Just a quick last point. The Shah, who Israelis seem to love, I mean, the Shah's son sitting in,
Yeah.
as we call it, Tehrangeles. It's called Los Angeles by some, we prefer to call it Tehrangeles. But sitting there, the Shah was extremely anti India. He used to keep supplying Pakistan with all kinds of weaponry to use against India. Nobody was happier when the Shah was deposed than India was.
Hmm.
And so for us, Khomeini was actually very good for India in that sense. And that is where the balancing game has to come in, because we know he's terrible. We know him and his successor Khamenei do terrible things to Israel and everybody else. The problem is what comes in his place if the Shia Sunni divide heals. It's not a good scene for India.
Yes. And also, but what is, for example, the Indian position? Just let's say you're friends with geopolitical allies, let's say with Iran. What would be India's position? Maybe you can tell me on the Iranian nuclear program, for example, because that's the big thing. I don't think Iran is falling in the near future, at least. It doesn't look like from within. But Israel is contemplating now, according to all reports and um, things that I know, whether to strike Iran's nuclear program in the very near future. What would India's position be on Iran's nuclear program?
It's very negative. Uh,
Ah,
we've told the Iranians this to their face that we don't support their nuclear program. And we're like, see, we're very clear about this. We wanted to make nuclear weapons, so we never joined the NPT. You don't get to sign the NPT and then say, oh, we're having second thoughts. We don't want to join it, etc., etc. If you've signed the
yeah.
NPT, you stick to it.
Hmm.
So it's very negative to Iran going nuclear. The last thing we want is another nuclear power in the neighborhood. In fact, we collaborate very regularly with the Americans on surveillance of Iranian nuclear sites and things. It's one of the things in the intelligence sharing between India and America is our own analyses and intel on Iranian nuclear sites. We
Yeah.
exchange that quite frequently. We're not comfortable with them supporting Hezbollah and things like that. The thing is, we don't really have a counterterrorism dialogue with the Iranians at all,
Hmm.
because Iranian terrorism hasn't affected us. Pakistani terrorists who very frequently launch strikes inside Iran, especially in the two. Now, there's the two Sunni provinces on the two extremes, southern extremes of
Yes.
Iran. There is Khuzestan on the Iraq border, which has its own Sunni extremism problem. And there's Sistan va Balochistan on the eastern border, on the
Yes.
Pakistan border, which again has Sunni terrorists. These groups are very different. They're actually, the Pakistanis keep them completely insulated from the groups that operate against India. We've not been able to find any overlap. So there's actually zero cooperation, counterterrorism cooperation with Iran. So there's no forum in which even raise this with them, right?
Okay. Um, Abhijit, what about one of the things? Do you think that, let's say like this, there in the past 10 years, the Indian economy has grown unbelievably. If I'm not mistaken, like I said before, the fourth largest economy in the world. You have surpassed China, the number of people that live here, the largest, the country most inhabited, and the people are moving out of poverty very quickly in Iran, which is one of the reasons in India, which is one of the reasons why you need to be friends with people in the area. For example, on oil and other supplies, which is more and more needed, and the more people are leaving poverty and moving to better situations with their lives. On the other hand, with this happening, people have been saying, does this mean that India is moving to be a more Western society, closer to the West in terms of its ideology, its values, and also the way it runs its, international ways? So, and on the other hand, obviously, we see BRICS, and so it's moving maybe towards the opposite direction. How are we to see, in your opinion, and obviously in short because of the format, but you know, where is India now in terms of the way it looks at itself? Is it more Western? Is it more Eastern?
We're neither West nor East. We have a very unique pattern of behavior that's all of our own. We didn't need Western lessons of tolerance to not persecute Jews. It's just so I belong to a school of Hinduism that is atheist. I am
Mm,
not counted as being outside Hinduism. I am a staunch atheist. My validation of my atheist comes from our holy book, the Vedas, which validates atheism. It's one of the 12 schools of Hinduism, and I am accepted as a full Hindu, right? So this battle of Westphalia and tolerance that came about in the West, it's we had it in the Bronze Age 3,500 years back, and that's called the Vedas. It's actually our Treaty of Westphalia, where everybody was allowed to be a freak, and we celebrate freakishness in all its forms and manifestations, right? Monotheism, polytheism, henotheism, atheism, agnosticism, everything. In fact, Hinduism is agnostic at its core. So India is going to be Indian. If the West understands that, well and good. If the West doesn't understand that, c'est la vie, we've got nothing to prove. Uh, Number one. Number two is, it's precisely because of this economic growth that you see our dependence on Qatar, which has been just as malignant with us as they've
yes.
been to you. We've got a huge diaspora in Qatar. In fact, my own aunt lives in Qatar. uh, she's a doctor out there. And it isn't the low end labor market, it is the medium to high end white collar professional market. Engineers, architects, of course, there are blue collar laborers as well, but overwhelmingly it's engineers, architects, doctors, and very highly qualified professionals like that, which makes us dependent on them. They are also dependent on us, which doesn't prevent them from doing evil to us, specifically Al Jazeera, or let's
Hmm.
just call it what it is, Al Qaeda B team. Um, and we manage. I mean, we manage. It's one of those. Think of it as the mating dance of the praying mantis. Ultimately, the female praying mantis is going to chop your head off, but you still go along in this ballet of mating ballet or whatever it is, right? The third issue with India's growth is very, very problematic. We're not able to overcome our regulatory systems and things like that in order to industrialize rapidly. Now, I don't know how you grow without industrialization, which is why the per capita income and human development remains very low. Uh, and the main mental problem to this is that, we look at technology as a substitute for human failure, as opposed to the Western Israel, which invest in human beings and see technology as an enabler. In India, the philosophical approach is technology is a substitute. Don't invest in human beings, invest in technology to overcome human failing. We don't fix our human failings, we use technology as a scapegoat. Very, very dangerous. It's not going down the right path. I am an Indian economic skeptic because even our education system is not, there is a huge mismatch between the kind of labor you need for manufacturing and the kind of, learn by rote zombies that our education system is producing.
Mm. But one last thing that on that issue is that I interviewed an Indian CEO that after October 7th, all the Palestinians couldn't be brought in to work here anymore. So we had to bring in people from outside. We brought in lots of people from India, people who work in construction, for example, thousands of people. He's one of the big companies that brought it in. And I asked him where it's easier to do business here in India. It's harder in both countries, but he said India, he didn't really want to, I guess, criticize his own country here, but it's very, very difficult. The regulations, the just the bureaucracy, navigating through, like, to get all the permits to do what you need to do. Is that something that people in power understand, that they need to build a free market system? They need to, like in America, Trump comes in, he cuts all the regulations, he's looking for wasteful spending. You mentioned Doge. And is that anything in India that's even in the mindset of people that they need to get done?
Zero. It's the biggest complaint you'll hear, and yet it is the least amount of inertia in government is to actually sort that problem out. In
Wow.
fact, the current prime minister came about promising more governance, less government. Under him, the bureaucracy has expanded so much, it's becoming stifling noose around our neck. There was a very insightful paper written as usual by a Brit who was in charge of the partition and independence. And his name was Sir Ivor Jennings. And the paper is called Constitutional Problems in Pakistan. It's a 1952 paper. And, he very presciently remarked the net result of partition isn't that India got the Hindus and Pakistan got the Muslims. It was that India got the bureaucracy and Pakistan got the military, and it's going to hang around their neck like a hangman's noose. That hangman's noose, what the army is to Pakistan, what the army is to Egypt, what the army is to Syria, is what the bureaucracy is to India. It
Hmm.
hangs around our necks like a hangman's noose. One step here, and the stool falls and your neck snaps. And there has been zero movement towards controlling it. In fact, it has become more rapacious, more rapine, more extortive. Remember, this is a colonial bureaucracy. It wasn't meant to serve the people, it was meant to extract from the people. And that has not changed. So, if anybody wants to do decolonization, please come to India. We're like a decolonization project. We're internally colonized people. Please
Yeah.
decolonize us.
But do the people understand, I guess, in power, just on a basic level, that growth needs to come with lessening the burden on the people that want to do
We
business?
don't. We
They
don't.
don't.
So many people are dependent on government employment. It's a huge vote
Uh-huh.
bank out here. In India, we don't have a right. In fact, the center is somewhere left of Mao Zedong.
Wow.
So imagine what the Indian right is. Indian right is essentially a Zhao and Lai to the central Mao Zedong.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't because they keep on saying that India is moving to the right, but you're saying just on these internal issues, there's like zero, pretty much no difference between the old guard and the new guard.
No, it's
Okay.
the BJP is a conservative uh, uh, leftist party.
Okay. Um, I want to ask you about the US and India, just to finish off the last part of our program. The Donald Trump comes in, and his first, I guess, actions are to tariff the whole world, mutual tariffs he just signed, meaning that the same way, for example, Israel will tariff American goods, America will tariff Israeli goods. And the same thing, obviously, in India and all other countries. And so but it seems to me that there's a sort of understanding among countries, or at least people in countries, that this is actually a good thing, in the sense that he's looking out for America's interests, and we're looking out for Israeli interests, and you're looking out for India's interests. And so everyone is looking out for our other interests, and we can, through that, get to a mutual understanding, as opposed to the old guard, which was had no interests, or had personal interests, or some global values interests that no one really understood on a practical level. Do Indians see it that way also?
Yeah, look, for us, tariffs aren't even an issue. If America imposes tariffs other than the actual producers who get hurt, no, tariffs, Indians are like, yay, tariffs, lovely. I mean, we use tariffs on everything. Trump keeps saying this, remember, that India is the most tariffed country on earth. We take great pride in being the most tariffed country on earth. We love our tariffs because we want to keep a lot of things out of our market. And the way we've negotiated with Trump is actually quite masterful. I think we're the only ones who get the better of Trump. The first time he tried imposing Harley David tariffs on us, because we have our own very good bike called Royal Enfield. It's a beautiful bike. I don't know if you have any of them in Israel, but if any of your viewers are watching, please dump Harley Davidson and buy Royal Enfield. Far superior bike, much classier. The Royal Enfield is like watching Don Giovanni at the Vienna Philharmonic. The Harley Davidson is like watching Metallica on the roadside or something like that. Okay, so that's the difference. When those tariffs were lifted, nobody bought Harley Davidson. Yeah. So now he comes and tells us, you need to lift tariffs on duck meat, well, the one that stuck was duck meat, but none of those things on the tariff list are things that Indians eat. So, of course, we don't eat beef and we eat very little pork. Mostly we eat chicken and mutton. And mutton, what we call mutton in India, is actually goat. We don't eat sheep, we eat goats. Two different
Hmm.
animals. I don't know why Indians confuse them, but we eat goats. Duck, nobody eats. So, yeah, we're lowering tariffs on duck. Who the hell's going to eat duck? So it's fantastic. We find we can keep taking Trump for a ride with tariffs, lower tariffs on things no Indian wants to buy, and we say, well, bro, we did what you told us, and look, we can't force people to buy stuff, and it
So
works.
right, but I mean, on like on a personal level, do Indians like Trump?
Yes, very
Why?
much. You know
Why?
why? First is we live vicariously through him. He's doing to their bureaucracy what we want to do to our bureaucracy.
Aha.
Number one. Number two, he says what he means and means what he says. He's a very direct talker, which is lovely. Indians, the least liked presidents in India are Obama, number one, and Bill Clinton, number two.
And
Because
who?
Obama and Clinton.
Aha.
Because, they used to keep mouthing off banalities which nobody understands, high philosophy which has zero relevance on the ground. And basically, they were quite duplicitous and facetious, almost whatever. Let's not go there. The third is the fact that, Trump is very transactional. We love that. This kind of transactionality that is the stereotype of the international Jew, a la the protocols of elders of Zion. Sorry, I've got these reaction emojis on my computer. Anyway, uh, this isn't a swear word or a negative thing in India. We love these kind of things. It's a compliment. Half the slurs used against Jews in the protocols of the elders would be seen as great compliments in India. We have these trading communities called the Banyas and the Jains. The Jains are a micro religious minority who practically control India, who are more Hindu, even though they're not Hindus, they are more Hindu extremists than Hindus are. And they're the only ones who can come and tell a Hindu, bro, you're not Hindu enough. I'm more
Mm.
Hindu than you. Right? And half the things you hear about Jews in anti-Semitic circles are the things we would use for Banya Hindus and Jains. And it's viewed as a great compliment. Oh my God, you control the world. You
Yeah,
control all the finances. You're
that's so
very
good.
stingy with your money. And if you're stingy with your money, mothers will want their daughters married off to you. My mom, when I came out as gay to my mom, she's like, okay, you can't marry any Christians or Muslims, but you can marry Jews. They're just like us. They've got this elder sisterly attitude towards money, and that's the kind of person. So Jews are fine, but not Christians or Muslims.
Aha.
So, it's. Uh, I know people sitting in Israel might be going, "What the hell, man? This is like so anti-Semitic." It isn't. There is no innate It's a compliment out here.
Right.
So
It's not a hateful thing to say. Like I was reading not too long ago, you go on these like anti-Semitic forums online, and you're like, "Oh my God, people, the Jews control everything. They're like in charge of everything behind the scenes. They're making Hollywood and all the banking system and everything." And I
and
was like, "That is so good. I didn't realize I had so much power."
exactly. And so every Indian mother is like, oh my God, I want to marry my daughter off to a Jew. Why do you think in America the greatest intermarriage after Catholics and Protestant is Hindus and Jews? There's a whole breed of people called Hindus.
Hmm.
Because they are highly educated, they're highly urban, they focus on white collar jobs, they focus on delayed gratification and focus on the children and families
And education.
and education. Education is supreme to everything else. You may not have food on the table, but you will bloody well get a college
Yes.
education, right? Um, it's one of those things where it's two completely compatible communities, and the slurs are seen as words of love. Have you seen that
Hmm.
movie Hebrew Hammer?
Which?
Hebrew Hammer. It's the first Jewish superhero. It's a
Ah.
spoof on how a Jewish superhero would be. And their talking dirty is our kids are going to go to college. They're going to become doctors. They're going to become engineers. This is like,
Yeah. It's
it's quite
great.
good. Yeah,
Abhijit, maybe this is comes into the next part. Well, in America, one of the reasons Trump was elected, I think, is now obvious to both parties, is the whole woke backlash. So in the West, we've had, every time you would have to like go to a conference, you have to say my pronouns are this and this, and during the 2020 whatever Black Lives Matter, everybody put a black cubicle on their profile on you know you to Instagram, whatever. And then you couldn't say what a man or a woman was, and all this really crazy, I think, like dumb but also harmful to society things.
yeah,
And there was a big backlash, I think, and this is one of the reasons that Trump won. And what you're saying is, and I'm just going to surmise because it seems obvious, that in India this had zero relevance. Like people are not in danger of being woke in India.
correct. Quite the contrary, we have a very pleasant experience with this. Uh, Homosexuality was decriminalized some 10 years back,
Hmm.
maybe 7, 8 years back. And right now, we're empowering our transgender people. Now, transgender in India has a whole history. They were considered sacred and they were celebrated. And this is people who are born with gender dysmorphia, which is to say, your genitals aren't properly formed. They are not male genitalia or female genitalia. There's some kind of, I hate using the word flaw, but let's use that word. And so, we're now in the process of empowering them. They weren't even recognized as people. They had to conform to male or female before that.
Hmm.
But what you saw in America was very much a first world problem. We're still a very third world country. And we're still dealing with the emancipation of women. We haven't even achieved the emancipation of women completely yet. So we will first achieve that. It will move very slowly. We are now incorporating transgender people, as in genuine transgender people, into the workforce. Self identification does not work out here. You self identify, you'll be whacked. I frequently, make a point just to mock wokes. I wear a burqa to work and self identify as a Muslim woman or something like that, uh, because everybody finds it hilarious. It's a joke out here.
Mm.
And when we see what's going on in America, are these people mad? If
Yeah.
you do even a quarter of the things Americans do to kids out here, puberty blockers or gender affirming care, or taking kids away from the parents because they don't validate your self identification, uh, you'll be in jail for being a pedophile in India. And I'm very proud of that. Uh,
Yeah.
this is something, it's child abuse. Uh, we're very clear it's child abuse. It's never infected us so far. We were watching this ghoulish little circus play out there in absolute disbelief. It never caught on here. There was some BlackRock funded employment agencies that tried these stunts out here, it was crushed very, very quickly. They were removed from the public sphere very, very quickly. And we don't hesitate to hurl epithets like pedophile. We will hurl it at you unapologetically. I have done it myself unapologetically. And that is exactly what you are, a pedophile.
Well,
Very
Abhijit,
simple.
one question that's interesting on that is that not too long ago interviewed spoke off the record with someone from an Eastern European country, and she explained that because they went through communism, therefore they're way less susceptible to these things because this is the language that communists used.
Yeah.
The problem is that the young generation goes to Western Europe, studies in universities, and comes back brainwashed. Is that something that you're worried about? The young people go to the elites go to Western universities, get indoctrinated, come back to India, and spread this garbage.
So our backwardness is our inoculation. Even when they go abroad and get their woke virus shots, they come back and the inoculation kind of wears off very, very quickly. You can't afford to be like that in India. Your business certainly won't work. So we find that India is the best detox for things like that, where woke ideas come to die.
So, last question, Abhijit. You said that you are very not liked by the establishment in India.
Yeah.
Maybe can you explain to us, except for the, I guess, what we said about regulations and bureaucracy being like crazy and entrenched, like really into the system? Why don't they like you?
I'm seen as a traitor because both my parents were very powerful bureaucrats. So I'm seen as a race traitor. In Germany, the equivalent of an Aryan who married a Jew, I guess.
Mm.
I've gone against my own people. Um, I do it very brutally. I don't pull my punches. I'm very nasty. Um, why should they? Why should I? Because in India, I think the bureaucrats have, through errors of omission, ended up killing more Indians than the British ever did through crimes of commission. I don't think that's something to be taken very lightly. I don't feel it requires me to be very gentlemanly to point that out. You're literally killing people. I don't have to be polite about it.
Hmm.
Um, I've ended lots of careers as well by writing nasty things about them and exposing them in the papers. But uh, anyway, it's not like all bureaucrats hate me. It's like some sections of government love me. Well, the Ministry of External Affairs hates me, so that's fine.
Abhijit,
Badge
just
of honor,
before
badge of honor.
one last thing, I just remembered that you told me when we spoke about the deal that Israel made for the hostages that you think that this just proves your point that you say all along that the terrorists should be killed. Like there shouldn't be prison sentences. There shouldn't be. It should just be you're a terrorist, you're dead. Right? That was basically what you were saying. Can you just in a minute explain it to us?
We've been through this in India. We've put people in jail. Our planes have been hijacked. IC-814 that got taken to Kandahar 20, 30 years back was the last example of that. And we've paid a very heavy price for it because the people we released are the ones that came and
Yes.
did the 2611, which also targeted the Chabad house in Bombay,
Right.
uh, uh, and the Pulwama attacks and things like that. We know what that is. We've got the death penalty, it's in our constitution. Um, I oppose the death penalty on principle, except when the person in question has a high likelihood of a hostage situation eventuating. And I think it's perfectly fine for Israel to be a moral state, just as it is for India to be a moral state or have delusions of high morality, and still take hard realpolitik decisions, which is that if you have people who will, in all probability, be hostage ransomed, get rid of them.
Very good, and I tend to agree with you. Abhijit Iyer-Mitra. I think I said that right.
You said
It
that right.
was A real pleasure. I think we should do this again sometime in the future
Sure.
because there was a lot of interesting subjects that we spoke about. And I think it's important for Israelis to get to know India. We're going to hear a lot about India in the next decade or so, even more obviously, but you're growing, like we said, and you're going to have a lot of more influence as time goes on, I think. Um, even with all the problems we spoke about here. So it's a pleasure speaking to you. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your time from India, and send the regards to all our friends there. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Heaps of love from us to all of you out there. Stay strong and please don't take
Thank you,
prisoners.
Abhijit.
Thank you.